Hello, insane children, and welcome to episode 17 of the crowd design sessions for Alice Asylum. We are joining you today from our super secret Discord server, a perk of being a patron over on my Patreon channel. If you would like to join these while they're going out live, do scroll down to the description below and you will find links to the Patreon and a lot of other informative things related to Alice Asylum. As I said, this is episode 17. I'm pretty sure I got that correct this time. And today we're going to be talking about a number of things, but we're going to start off, I think, and it may take us the whole episode, by doing, I hope, a little bit of house cleaning and trying to kind of shore up the frame of what it is that the story around the game is that we're creating here. And we're going to go after a theme or a character that seems to kind of be central to certainly Alice Madness Returns, but is going to play a role. We're not sure how significant in Alice Asylum, and that is the character of Dr. Bumby, who in Wonderland is represented as the dollmaker. One of the reasons that I want to do this is because what's been suggested is that he lives within a train station in Wonderland, and that he would be at the center of a dynamic where Alice collects chaos coins and then takes those to trade for upgrades or additions to her armament or her clothing. And that actually then links him to a location, it links him to mechanics, it links him to weapons and clothing. Him being kind of central to all that then leads us to the fact that our wiki, which again, you can find a link to the wiki in the description below. Our wiki is missing a lot of those links between locations, characters, and mechanics. And so I was thinking that perhaps for this session and several future sessions, what we could work on and focus on is going in there and really cleaning up and really well defining all those links and all those very critical characters, components, locations, and then we could come back to the ideas and suggestions that have been put forth in the community section. As I said to our mods before we kicked off today, what I'd like to do is focus on the frame of the house that we're building, and then we can later go back and mess around with the furniture and which rooms we're going to put it in and so forth. So that's my proposal for today. I'll hand it over to our mods in case they have anything they want to add, or if our insane children want to jump in. This would be the time to do that.
No, just think of it this way, all the insane children. We have to build the structure of the house before we burn it down.
But we want some stuff left, don't we?
So I think right off the bat, though, someone came up with, I'm going to butcher names. Wait, would him being President Alice Asylum mean he's got his fingers in Alice's mind before AMA? I think that's a good touching point to even start off with.
Okay, so I think you've butchered the question as well.
I've butchered everything.
You're saying that an insane child that goes by the name Amina, if I'm trying to read that correctly, has said, wait, would him being present in Alice Asylum mean he's got his fingers in Alice's mind before even American McGee's Alice? Well, Amina, the answer to that question is yes and no. So keeping in mind that everything we see present in Wonderland, aka the reflection of Alice's mind, is stuff that is informed by her experiences in reality. And it stands to reason that Alice has had contact with and experiences with Dr. Bumby in the years prior to the fire, the prior fire. And so, yeah, I mean, the idea that he's represented in Asylum actually would make a lot of sense. It would be almost unusual if he was excluded from Asylum, especially now that we know he exists. Now, look, if we had the foresight and all the planning in place when we were creating American McGee's Alice, to know that, hey, we're going to do a sequel, and hey, we're going to retcon it a bit. So the fire was started by this child molester and hey, we're going to have to end up murdering that guy at the end of all this. Look, we would have had reference to him in AMA as well. Okay, we didn't know that stuff. That that wasn't the grand plan all along, but it would certainly make sense that in Asylum he has a place. He's playing a function. And look, at the end of Asylum, there could be something that's done that removes from what's going to happen next in AMA some of the elements that we're playing with in Asylum. I think we can find a graceful way to do that. Now, I don't think that, we're certainly not at a stage in Asylum. We're not trying to rehash or reintroduce him as a bad guy. She doesn't know that yet, which means we can leverage that lack of knowledge to just employ him as a sort of standard character. Now, of course, we, the audience, know that lurking under the surface, he's super evil, but that just provides us as the creators an opportunity to kind of twist and play with expectations, and of course, never really reveal exactly what it is that he's on about, right? So I hope that answers that question.
Alice on Elm Street makes a very good idea, as usual, as they do, that maybe Bumby is seen as a centaur running the shop, since Alice initially mistook him for a centaur. That would be quite good and subtle.
Yeah, I think that we could look at something like that, a kind of dressing him up. I wouldn't mind having him as a sort of kind of a more I guess I'd been thinking of him as a more human-like character, but the idea that he's a centaur could work. It could still carry the same face as Bumby, so we would all get it. I don't know. Let me think about that one a little bit. I think it's an interesting idea. So let me think about that a little bit.
Well, Octo Greg wants to have some talks if everyone's good.
Okay, just 1 second if we can, because we've skipped over a question from Seafoam. That's okay. Martin jumped straight to something, and I just wanted to really quickly touch on what Seafoam says. Does the Queen of Hearts still represent the sun, aka chaos? Question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark. I'm guessing that means this is a pretty important question for Seafoam. Yeah, so we've talked about the Queen of Hearts, I think in relation to the center of Wonderland and the relationship to chaos before. And I believe that she still sort of occupies that point, but we've also now got the idea that Alice goes from slumber to chaos to denial to anger, and that when she's in chaos, the queen isn't there. When she gets to anger, the queen is there. And that the queen actually blames the destruction and the chaos on the Red Queen. So this idea that the Queen of Hearts represents chaos may have fallen by the side, and you'll have to let me know. By the way, this is one of those reasons that I really want to go into the wiki and start solidifying the things that we're working on here in terms of themes and connections, because I think a lot of this stuff we've talked about, we're not properly recording, and that's probably my fault more than anyone's. So, okay. Seafoam says it's not exactly like that. I think more or less keeps tabs on her through Pris Witless. So that is in reference to the suggestion that it's a centaur running the shop. And yeah, I mean, that doesn't necessarily preclude the idea that Bumby's represented in Alice's mind as the shopkeeper. So, keep in mind that like Bumby doesn't actually have a connection to Alice's mind in Asylum. It's not like what we find in Madness Returns, where he's literally counseling her. He's speaking into her ear as her therapist or psychologist, and therefore he's hypnotizing and poisoning her. He doesn't have that sort of connection to her at this point. So. Lucas says we are allowed to contradict ourselves some. Yes. Okay. So now I'm to Octo Chicken asking for the microphone for some Bumby ideas.
Go right ahead.
Hello, is this working?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I was talking with a couple of the other insane children earlier this week about Bumby ideas, since this was mentioned in the Patreon post. So there were a few ideas that kind of I was thinking to throw out, kind of disjointed, but all kind of generally connected to the point of Bumby.
Okay.
So I like that idea of him being uh, the weapon shop guy, where perhaps in this one he would be more of the toy maker than a doll maker, because I think that name doll maker just has kind of such a creepy tinge to it that if he's kind of drawn back a step because she doesn't know what his actual purpose is, might be kind of I don't know, just make him a little more subtle as to what his evil is at this point. I was picturing him as having the almost the same physical appearance, but more like shiny and clean. Still have the little drawers in his chest that he could like pull out weapon upgrades and components
Yep.
and things. Um, even if they're trying to mix the centaur idea, you might be able to just have like the horns on his forehead, but otherwise look very kind of friendly and inviting. Since at least the way I've understood it, the characters in Wonderland are supposed to be like based off Alice's understanding of them in the real world. Right now, he would just be he's not evil to her. He's just that guy who was overly friendly to her sister when he was like visiting the house and was like this kind of like kind of kissing her dad's ass as like this really fancy student was like, oh yeah, yes, Miss Liddell, you know everything, yes. So she would just know him as that guy rather than anything
Yeah. Well,
evil.
if you let me interject for a second, one of the things that I think is important to keep in mind is that it's not her mind is not ready at the age of 13 to go beyond maybe a kind of creepy premonition.
Yeah.
Somebody's sawing wood.
I think he's scratching off his notes.
Ah, okay. Yeah, so yeah, I think no, I don't want to say I think we definitely want to avoid any suggestion of the sexual molestation, all those kind of themes. So I would I'd hope that when we presented Bumby, uh, in this asylum setting, he was presented as a kind of like I even had a kind of this picture in my mind of like a Christmassy, Saint Nick toy maker, candy canes and very warmly lit and something like that because Alice wouldn't have any concept of him as anything else, right? He's
I
just
know.
an adult figure that, in
I
fact,
actually I even had that as a note of like somewhat like a Santa Claus figure.
well, it's also important to keep in mind when he came around to the house, he would have tried to pass himself off as like really on the side of the girls, Perhaps he brought them candy, perhaps he brought them toys, and so he was constantly trying to get them to like him, and to kind of push them away from their own parents. So the parents were a sign of orderliness, and so this doctor, of course, he's evil. He's playing them against themselves. He's playing them against the parents. And how do you do that? You offer them candy and invite them into the van, right? So this is what I'm thinking, and it's another one of the reasons why I think it fits neatly together that he would be the toy guy, is because that's what 13-year-old Alice would remember him as, and that's what her subconscious would portray him as. Oh, that's the nice old guy who used to bring us toys, right? She doesn't know anything other than that yet.
And with a centaur, you could maybe meld him into a half person with the reindeer backing instead of a horse backing for the Santa Claus aspect. So on him is the sleigh. He has where his presents reside.
I don't. I'm not sure if you're making a joke or if that's serious.
It's both humorous and not.
Okay.
What I mean is people
Alright.
keep bringing up the centaur. Centaur is half man, half beast.
Yes, I understand that it is. Look, my rejection or my resistance to the centaur idea is that I'm concerned about how he's rendered, animated, and placed in the game. It's going to be a lot more difficult to have a shopkeeper in the shape of a horse than it would be just to have a regular old two-legged, normal leg shopkeeper, right? So I mean, my brain is already jumping into the technical challenge or the artistic challenge of putting a horse in a toy shop. So again, as I said before, I'd like to just kind of set that aside for now and just focus on the guy, Bumby, and the toy shop idea, if that's possible. So where were we, Greg? I think you still had some other thoughts
Yeah,
there.
so I guess to kind of follow along with that idea of him being a nice guy, like the way I was trying to think is it should be like done so subtly that it's like if this was the first game in the series and you didn't know AMR was coming out or AMA was coming out, people would be on forums arguing, is this guy, is the something weird with the dollmaker? Like, is he cool or is he like something weird? And there could be this discussion of it looks like a nice clean lake, but is there something moving underneath? Like it should be really subtle that there's something maybe not right with him that young Alice would never notice, and maybe most of the audience isn't going to notice without that foreknowledge of what's coming.
Yeah, exactly. And Alice on Elm Street and Arcadia make the same point here. Maybe the shop is called the Centaur Toy Shop. It's maybe there's a painting of a centaur on the wall. Things like that, I think would be okay, and it would for the people who've played AMR. They would get it, right? Also got to keep in mind there's going to be a fairly large percentage of the audience who've never played any of the games. So, like you said, it'd be kind of fun to play up that expectation.
Yeah. Let me see. I'm almost done with all my notes here. And I don't know how feasible it would be, but I think if his shop's like its own little area, I think like musically we could use like the Dollmaker theme and the Puppet Master tracks from AMR and maybe redo them in a different key or with different instrumentation. So it's a similar sound, but it's much more cheery and bright. And so but that underlying menace could still be there where you're like, that doesn't really sound like a happy song, but
that's
I guess
a great
it's fine.
idea. Yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me of when you try to walk into an FAO Schwartz and they're constantly playing "It's a Small World," and you wonder how the people in there don't go completely insane. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And right now, Joey is working on some art to illustrate what the toy shop would look like in the train station, and then also inside the shop itself. So in the next week or two, we should see some renders of what that could look like.
All right, and I think the last thing I had was a suggestion for like how to kind of maybe shuffle them out at the end of the game. I don't know if it would fit with the idea for the end game that something could happen where the train station hub world could be destroyed near the end. You could bury the Toymaker, Dollmaker in the rubble, and it's like, oh, he's buried under there, so he can't be involved in the events of AMA. The ruins of the train station are where he gets the infernal train, and in reality, it could be that oh, Alice has slipped into a coma, so Bumby thinks, oh, I don't need to be here. I don't need to watch over her. That loose end's taken care of. I can end my residency at the asylum and go do my other work because I don't need to watch her anymore. She's in a coma. It's over. I don't need to come back. And then later be like, uh-oh, now I need to get involved again.
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, I think the idea of him somehow, either disappearing under the rubble of a broken train station or he disappears on a train, on the looking glass line, he goes off somewhere, we don't know where. But having him make some sort of an exit and having some sort of arc of story for him where, he expresses to Alice that this place isn't what it used to be, or that, he feels like there's something else beyond the walls of Wonderland, and he's going to go find it. Like if he's got a dream in mind that or a goal in mind that somehow links to what ends up being his eventual exit, that would be really good.
Well, and since he, as Octo Greg Chicken said, he's in the train station in Madness Returns, he is the person that involves the infernal train. So having that kind of two-step works very well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we don't see the train station again in AMA, so that would mean that leaving him somehow, him being in the train station, and he eventually, we learn that he sort of takes it over, it becomes a part of him, whatever, that could be a good transition there.
Awesome. So I think the last little point I had was I think there'd been discussion the first time this idea had been brought up about, how do you stop the random players from deciding to just stab him the second they walk into the toy shop? I'm like, oh my God, it's this guy, let me kill him. Could either, make the train station like a no weapons allowed area. Alice being a polite, well-raised girl of that era would know, hey, you don't bring your toys around and drag them all over the train station. You don't bring weapons in there. Or you could always have like an achievement if someone just decides to snipe him in the face, and like a temporal paradox achievement pops up. Game restarts from your last save point, and then you're like, okay, I guess I can't do that again.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't mind, and I think it's pretty common that you have weapon-free zones, especially in areas that you're going to return to. So I think there's plenty of precedent. Gamers aren't going to be angry with us if we choose to have a few areas where that makes sense. Obviously, they're not going to be enemies running around in the same section where you've got the shop set up. As far as the player going in there and wanting to shoot this character in the face, I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, there's film, movie precedent for watching, say, Anakin Skywalker prior to his becoming Darth Vader, and you see this sort of arc, and you see the story, and you can empathize with him as a character prior to the transformation. I guess I'd sort of be thinking something similar. Like, we know what this guy is going to become. We know what this guy represents, but it's, there's also kind of the screwing with the player in the sense that he's got something you need. He's got the weapon upgrades you need. So we force the player to somehow become reliant on him. Now, like you said, it could be that towards the end of this game, we give Alice the opportunity to be the one that, though she doesn't know why, or her subconscious doesn't know why, she ends up blowing up the train station and burying him in it. Now, we could do that on the premise of he does something else that Alice doesn't like within the interactions they have inside of Asylum, and it's sufficient, for her to like blow him up and murder him. She's murdering everybody else anyway. And we could say that her subconscious has some tickling awareness that leads her to that point in the story where, like, I don't know why, but I feel like blowing up this train station and this guy with it. So we could leave an opening for that.
Yeah, I could see either a thing where it's Alice herself decides, oh, I need to destroy the station, or in the course of the story, some of the enemies or antagonists in the story destroy the train station, and that's like, oh, that's your impetus for the final mission or whatever. And she might be going, thinking, I've lost like friends here. I lost the Toymaker who was helping me out. I lost the mock turtle, and that's what drives her to this kind of level of rage at the end or something. There's definitely different possibilities for sure.
Yep. And Amina is saying, we could empathize with Anakin because we know he's still redeemable, and Bumby is an eternal bastard. All this is true, and I was kind of reaching for a parallel, trying to think, and I'm sure there are places in film and in narrative where, we see a character interacting with somebody before the nature, their evil nature is revealed. Actually, usually that's played up for that icky feeling, like, ooh, how could I have trusted him? How could I have been so close to him? So I think that this is a challenge for us to, I don't want to just try to wave it away and say like, oh, it's going to be all fine. We're just going to go in there and deal with him. No, I mean, let's figure out how to make the best use of the energy that's going to come out of that. The player, we are going to feel something is a bit off here. And so what do we do with that? How do we play that for our advantage? And I was thinking last night, when we're in different stages of the game, like say, for instance, we get to anger, how could we actually evoke real anger in the player and make it something where the first time that you get through these things, you think like, damn it, this game is really making me fucking angry. Like I'm over this, I want to give this a bad review. And then you realize, oh, wait a second. The game was playing me to make me feel the thing that this realm is supposed to represent. So my question would be, okay, there's a powerful agent for evocative, emotion in the dollmaker. How do we play that to get the emotion out of the player that Alice happens to be feeling as a function of this journey.
That's a really cool and definitely a lot of potential there. It's just definitely to see walking that line of how do you do this without getting the player so angry that they're like, forget this, uninstall the game, and they miss
Yep.
the whole thing.
Yeah.
So-
Well, Wendy says in the chat here, put a terrible bug in. But actually, I mean, you can make people angry without a bug. You know, I found in some games just a delay, like a slight delay that's put on an action you have to do over and over again. Like I was playing Days Gone, and you get attacked by, this goes back to the dog topic, the wolf topic, but you get attacked by these stupid wolves, and like you don't really want to have to kill them, but then you do. And then their carcass is sitting there, which is a waste unless you harvest meat from it. But the harvesting meat function takes like 5 seconds or 10 seconds to play a stupid animation. So you feel doubly angry that A, the game made me kill one of these things, and then B, it's making me sit here and carve this thing up in order for there to be any redeeming sort of benefit from the interaction. And it makes me feel angry every time it happens. I'm like, fuck this, I don't want to play this anymore. So I'm thinking, in the area of anger, is there something like that? Is there a kind of maddening, anger-inducing thing she's got to do repeatedly, but it's only in that zone? Now, the same question comes up, is there something we could do with Bumby, where every time we interact with him, we feel icky, because psychologically, like subconsciously, Alice would be feeling icky in the presence of this guy. But instead of us trying to avoid that, why don't we try to crank it up a bit?
Yeah, I like that. I also like, as you said, having her dependent on him almost. He's the one that has the upgrades. He's the one that, gives her access to these abilities.
Yeah.
And what's interesting? You could have it where you reject it. In Dishonored 2, you can actually reject the outsider's abilities. And you have to play the whole game without upgrades.
Mm.
So maybe that's an option where it's like, you know what? Screw you. I can do this on my own. But then that's more work as a developer to make sure things can work that way.
In that instance, we would be acting as the agent of her subconscious. We would be the element of the subconscious that is aware of this guy being a bad guy. Here's another way of thinking about it. We could make it where there's an easy way to go about getting those upgrades, which is to go to him and trade chaos coins. There's also perhaps a very difficult way, and that involves climbing to the top of some mountain and down into a volcano, and every time we do it, it's like we probably die 5 times. So maybe we give the player a choice. You can have the same upgrades, but one path is you have to go give these chaos coins you've collected to this guy is a child molester, and the other path is you have to climb down into a volcano and die several times. I mean, that's just a kind of brainstorm, but you get the idea. Give the players some
having
choice.
Something where you die a lot. I was just pondering that, because I've been dying a lot in a game that I've been playing. And I'm thinking, was that frustration or anger I was feeling? And if you did implement that, it's tricky. At what point does the player think your game is broken? Rather than, I see the game is trying to make me feel something. That is an incredibly subtle and thin line.
It's true. But I don't know that there's been a lot of games that have intentionally tried to tap into that, right? We know it's there, and we know it's actually relatively easy to mistakenly generate those kind of feelings. So what about doing it on purpose and then somehow acknowledging it? That's something to think about.
Very tricky.
You could also have it, I know there's a few games that have the mechanic where the character just doesn't listen, and that always brought up a bunch of anger to me. Martin, you've beaten God of War, right?
Ooh, beat it. Almost platinumed it, but I really burnt myself out after about 60 hours.
Oh, jeez. Remember the part where the boy, when he finds out about everything, how he just doesn't listen to Kratos anymore at that one point? He becomes kind of like a little douchebag, just goes around doing whatever he wants.
Yeah.
He doesn't listen to your commands.
He becomes an uber douchebag.
Yeah. Something like that, maybe. I mean, there's times where children just don't want to listen to you when they're angry. So maybe having that mechanic where you're maybe trying to fight an enemy in the anger realm, and you're inputting stuff, and she just kind of does whatever she wants. You tell her to go attack, she just walks a different direction, things like that.
Yeah. We've said things like that before of the character, the player having agency. Not the player, the Alice character on screen has agency of its own, and so would it sort of wrestle against your control inputs either to save itself? But I mean, this suggests that maybe it wrestles against your control inputs because it's angry or because it's depressed, or
Mm-hmm.
so I certainly think there's something to think about there. I see that Amina wrote a comment that the Toymaker, the dollmaker, um, it's Bumby's face, but it's Lizzie's voice, and that the difference could be unsettling. Yes, that would certainly be unsettling and weird, no doubt about it.
I mean, there's a lot you can do with audio cues. Just off-pitch something, slowly build it. So well done.
Right. Lucas Severs says, "Are we controlling Alice, or are we just like the vestige of sanity in her tortured mind?" This has always been an interesting question for me. Is like, what is the player's relationship to Alice? Because Alice is this kind of Waldo, like an entity that we control as it moves through a space, but we're not really Alice because we're playing a third-person game. So I made the decision early on that this was not a first-person game, and the reason was that we're not emulating a character, we're not playing a character's story, we're actually witnessing someone else's story. And I've always wondered, when you're doing that and you're playing as the witness, then, and you're also talking about a game in which various aspects of a character's psychology are represented in the world, what aspect of her psychology do we represent? Are we her id, her ego, superego? It's always been an interesting question. I don't really have the answer to that, though. All right. So Greg, do you have any other Bumby/dollmaker questions or?
No, I think that was it. Just want to put those ideas out, and then I can go meet myself and let everybody else have a chance to talk and share what they have.
Okay, cool. Does anybody else have anything on the dollmaker/Bumby, or his position in the train station, or anything like that? Okay. While you think about that, one of the points that I did want to bring up was that if you go over to our wiki, and again, links to that are in the description below, you will find a lot of the information that's been generated by these conversations, and also by pulling some of the sort of design main features out of Madness Returns and dumping them onto these pages. And if you go through there, you'll notice, like, for instance, under protagonists, we do not have a page for Bumby/dollmaker/ whatever we want to call him, the Toymaker, right? So one of my recommendations is that in some of the future design sessions that we're having, like today, we would actually go through there and find some of the holes that are in our current outline for what this game contains and the foundations and the sort of basic structure of it. So what I would like to see is that we would add a page under the wiki under protagonists, because he's not going to be a direct enemy. He is somebody that we go to and sort of collaborate or interact with in a non-violent type of fashion. So there needs to be a page for him, and there needs to be a page linked to from his page for the toy shop. And so that would mean going under, I'm not sure where we'd put that. Is that under, is there a locations?
There are locations or levels. I mean, technically that would be under the train station. So a subsection under there.
Is there a section for the train station yet?
Yeah, it's under Central Hub, I believe.
And fast travel.
Yeah, that's it.
Where?
It's on the main page.
Oh, I see. Under gameplay, fast travel. Okay. So what I would suggest is we actually need, and I've felt this in the past, like when you look at story, it breaks things down by the description of like slumber, shock, denial, anger. But in fact, anger is also the queen's domain. So do we want to rework anger to also say, Queen of Hearts domain as a part of the title? But then there's this section called levels, and then we've also got the Red Queen's castle there. So I think it's important for us to decide how we want to organize or break these things down. And then we need something that describes major locations, and maybe that's a subsection called locations, because the train station, is it a level? Is it a location? Is it, how do we categorize that?
I think separating things out into locations and levels is smart. So that shouldn't be that difficult. We'll get on that.
Okay, so it would be nice if under levels, or under, maybe it's like levels / locations, there was a subsection for the train station. Maybe that's not supposed to be under gameplay. I don't know how you guys feel about that. But wherever it ends up, I do see that if we click on fast travel and train station, what we get is some of the artwork that's been done for the interior of the train station, which is fantastic. And there's also some mention of the smaller substations that are going to be scattered around Wonderland. So as we look at this page, this brings up another good point, is we need more of the hyperlinks between the various topics. So for instance, when you're looking at the fast travel train stations page, I think that we would want to have here a list of the things that are found in the train station, and then a link to. So at the top of that list could be Travel Hub, and then a link to the article on how the Travel Hub connects everything together. And then below that, Bumby's Toymaker, dollmaker shop, and a click on that takes us to Bumby and the shop and all that, right?
Correct.
Okay. The same, I think, happens, for instance, when I was looking earlier before we started this design session. For instance, there was the Chaos coins. So Chaos coins are under collectibles, which is under gameplay. And if you click on Chaos coins, again, we get some nice art, but it's actually, in terms of the in-game stuff, it would be good to have this say that these could be used with the Toymaker, and then link to that page. So a lot of that interlinking, I think, is critical, and right now it's missing. Is now the time? Should we decide whether or not this is going to be the dollmaker or the Toymaker? Do we want to call him the Toymaker in Asylum, and he doesn't become the dollmaker until, because I see that's being used interchangeably, and I'm not sure, should he just always be the dollmaker once and for all? What's the thinking on that?
I think going back into what Greg said earlier, how kind of like downgraded, so people aren't that aware, Toymaker would probably make the best sense to me.
Yeah, and I think it wouldn't be that half-hearted to say, I make dolls, but you can call me the Toymaker or something like that. So he makes reference to it once.
Subtlety.
So it's subtle, yeah. So it's, there, but not.
Okay. Well, it would be good to record that on his page. I'm not really sure if I'm fully understanding how you guys want to do that. So you're saying he would be called the dollmaker, or he would be called the Toymaker? Which one?
Toymaker.
Toymaker, but in his opening monologue or whatever, at some point he would make a reference to, oh, and I've been known to make really nice dolls. Something where if you played the games before, it's like, aha, I see who that is.
I see. Yeah, I mean, I think without that dialogue, they're probably going to catch on to that pretty quickly if they played the previous games. But the main point here is that everyone would like for this character to be referred to as the Toymaker in Asylum. Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense.
It looks like
So
the
I'm-
chat agrees too.
okay, that's good. So I'm scrolling back through the chat really quickly here, and I'm seeing that Alice on Elm Street says kind of a quick thing on Bumby. Maybe the school is all bright and nice and cheerful, but there is a strange smell of smoke or fire. Alice could remark as well. I think the comment here was meant to refer to the shop. The shop is all bright and nice and cheerful, but there is a strange smell of smoke or fire. Yeah, having the character remark on that would be like, whacking a bell with a hammer, in terms of sending out the signal that, hey, this is that guy. This is that guy. But we can certainly think about that if it feels like we're not getting the message communicated clearly enough. Ancient Child has pasted in a bit of text talking about, I guess, drilling holes into people's skulls. Okay. I'm not sure. I guess I've lost what connection this has to the conversation we're having. So if that's really critical, Ancient Child, okay, it says here on what trepanning is, for those unaware, extra bonus Bumby as the Toymaker, and says could be wearing or having small discs dangling in the background. We won't know what the discs are or what they're made out of. I see. So the discs hanging in the shop are actually the bits of bone that were taken out of skulls for the trepanning. That makes sense. So yeah, that's an interesting idea. If we wanted to be really awful, we could have Alice running around collecting coins that are made out of little bits of bone like that, and then it's not until later that you realize you've been collecting all of the drilled out skull fragments. That would be awful. Going through the comments a little bit more here. It looks like how to fast travel. Okay, Seafoam says perhaps the way she can do it is each chapter is an emotion, and within that emotion are a few of the domains. This is in reference to how we would organize the wiki. Yeah, I'm not really sure on how we do this organizational task for the wiki, because both the high-level organization based on the emotions makes sense, but also trying to lay this out per the level names makes sense. I think my suggestion would be this. My suggestion would be that we lay it out based on the levels, and that when we describe a level, the first paragraph of the description could say, this is the realm of the Queen of Hearts, and it is within the zone of anger. It is the capital of anger. It is the center of anger, because the physical layout is what we're going to have to start working towards in order to get the game actually physically laid out. So reading down a little bit further here, Luca says to throw a chaos symbol on the ground to make a portal back to the hub. Luca, we could do something like that for a fast travel mechanic. There's also the idea that you'd have to go to one of these smaller train stations to get back to the hub. And I think this is a larger design question, and it really comes back to how we design the levels and how big they are. If the levels are truly massive and giant, then an instantaneous fast travel back from any one point to the hub could make sense. But if the levels are not so massive and giant, then perhaps we ask the player to get to one of these smaller train hub stations before they fast travel back.
And that could be used as a checkpoint system too.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you've got to move forward to the next small train station as the checkpoints. Although I want to be careful, and I think this was written up in the document that we worked on a few weeks ago, about not making the checkpoint system super frustrating. Because I know I'm one of those who hates when I've made some solid progress in a game and then I die and I'm sent way back. It makes me want to throw the controller, and that's why like I think Madness Returns, you died, you just basically respawned right where you were, right, or relatively close to where you were.
Yeah, I think the big thing with checkpoints is being able to go back to a level, so you don't have to slog through the entire thing.
Okay, I think then we may be using the same word for two different concepts. So I guess we might want to dig into that a little bit. Is the idea of a checkpoint is also the place to which you could select to travel. It doesn't matter if you've died or not. Is that right?
Once you've unlocked it, you can go to there.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So then I'm sort of mixing that up with what happens if you die, and then whether or not you're sent back to a checkpoint. As long as if we are doing that, as long as the checkpoints are relatively close together, would be my point. But that doesn't really fit together with the idea of these little mini train stations because they're pretty large, and then they disrupt the design of levels. If you just stuck them all over the place, they would look kind of out of place. Octo Chicken Greg says, I'm glad that the doll maker so well. Yeah, I was a little worried coming into this conversation today that there was something controversial that was going to be discussed about Bumby. And so I guess I'm glad that it wasn't terribly controversial.
Still 10 minutes to go. Don't jinx it.
Well, just don't dab or else our VPN will fall down. Lucas says, call him the Toymaker. Whether or not we reveal him as the doll maker at the end, I'm not sure. I don't think there's going to have to be a reveal. I think people are going to catch on to that pretty quickly. Octo Chicken says, I think the Toymaker in Asylum hides the menace. Alice doesn't know the true nature of his evil just yet. Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's a very good point, that not giving him the name of Dollmaker just yet, sort of like he upgrades from Toymaker to Dollmaker between the two games. And that's what Ice Killer says. So that's good. We're all on the same page there. Alice on Elm Street says, maybe if we're dealing with broken dolls as enemies, he could mention that he usually makes dolls, but something has happened to all of his dolls. Yeah, that could be a good idea. I suppose the other thing that could happen is that we could find out that he is somehow implicit or complicit in the creation of these doll enemies, and so that he does become a bit of an enemy in this game. But I might want to be careful with that. Ancient Child says, yes, Magus, which I'm not sure what that's in relationship to. Octo Chicken commenting further on the evil of the Dollmaker.
I think it was what I wrote exactly before what Ancient Child said.
Right. Amina says, I think some part of Alice must realize that Bumby is trouble when he enters the building on the night of the fire, because that's why her mind blocked it out as a hallucination. Therefore, it stands to reason that Wonderland would reflect this dissonance between the repressed distrust of the man and the conscious Alice's ignorance of the truth. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, there is a cognitive dissonance at work here. She is somehow aware of the presence of Bumby, but in this state that she's in, she's repressing it, she's hiding it. I mean, that is, I don't know if it's actually a function of denial, but certainly she's not representing it correctly in her subconscious. So we're just going to have to let it stay that way. Greg, back to the topic of the wiki, says maybe check out the wikis for other games and see how they break them down. Yeah, I mean, one of the things we could do is just check out, there's a pretty excellent fan wiki for the previous two Alice games. So maybe have a look at that. But Arcadia says the difference is our wiki isn't just an informative wiki, it's also a design Bible, so to speak. This is true, but I guess the question is, could you not use an informative wiki, aka one of the fan wikis for the previous Alice games? Could you not use that to reverse engineer and build one of those games? I think you could. So copying that style of presentation probably wouldn't hurt. One of the things let me state this as a goal. One of the things I'd like is if a potential publisher came over to the Asylum Wiki and wanted to get a really quick understanding of what the game is, and what it's composed of in terms of levels and scope. Does our wiki do that? I don't know that it does just yet. There's some basic information that's presented in that PDF that we worked on that actually isn't presented here. Say, for instance, the clear information about hours of gameplay. We could even go so far as to put all the information from that PDF in here. So price points, hours of gameplay, specific platforms, all that kind of stuff. So that's something to think about. Octo Chicken says, "Oh dear, please let us all save anywhere feature." Yes, I agree. We're going to have a save anywhere feature. We should make sure that's in the wiki. Where else do we have comments here to look at? There's just a couple mentions about how saving worked in the original Alice. Ice Killer says, "What about making a portal to the small train stations after you beat the bosses? Then you can take the trains back." So a portal to a portal, or a portal to a hub access. It might be a little bit too much portals, but I think I get the point there. Nabi Yang just joined and says, "I have to save everywhere in AMA. Who knows when some fish will jump up and swallow me in the river?" Yes. We do have a dab, so it's going to kill our VPN, I think. Okay. So we've got to the end of the comments here, and we are coming up on the hour. Is there anything else sort of really on fire that everyone would like to touch on or talk about? I would suggest, again, that perhaps the focus of the next week or two until the next time that we have a design session would be going into the wiki and following all the threads and linking them all together and trying to come up with as much of, or I guess put in as much of the information that we think we've decided on as possible, and then put in places where there's question marks for things that don't have links or don't make sense, and try to push towards getting a wiki that looks as complete as possible. And I will put myself out there that starting from today and through to the next design session, if our wiki mods want to grab me and say, "Come over and help with this," I will come over and help with that. And I think we can get all that knocked out pretty quickly. So yeah, I think that should be our goal right now. We're now talking about what was snorted back then, and opium was the drug of choice. They were all kinds. They were into all kinds of drugs back then. It wasn't just opium.
We were needing strategic coke points.
Choke points versus coke points. Okay. Okay. What else do we have? Is there anything else that people would like to touch on today, or shall we go away, clean up our wiki, and come back again to the next session with a refreshed wiki, and then we can go back to our community ideas? Very quiet out there. All right, I see that Greg is typing something. So while he's doing that, we will wrap this up. So this has been episode, I'm going to say it wrong, this is episode 17 of the crowd design session for Alice Asylum. Again, if you've been following along on YouTube, I hope you've not been typing comments into the page as we've discussed this, because it's not live on YouTube. It is in fact a recording. If you would like to follow along live and participate in these crowd design sessions, do consider becoming a patron. Links to our Patreon are in the description below, along with links to the design wiki and all kinds of other goodies. I do want to say thank you to our mods and our insane children. They are largely responsible for making all of this happen. And a shout out to Asteria Visual for recording and putting together the video, which we do upload to YouTube. Hope to see all of you again next time we do a design session. And until next time, I will say, get bent, governor.
And you have less than 2 weeks to pledge at $50 to get the Cheshire Kitten, along with the wonderful bag that he tries to claw himself out of from Hong Kong.
That's true. If it's still the month of August when you're listening to this, is promotion running over on Patreon for the Cheshire Kitten Collector Set. So do go check that out. Martin, are you going to say get bent?
I was just waiting for my my chance to jump in, but yeah, sure, why not? Get bent, governor.
All right, everybody. We will talk to you again or see you again next time. Farewell.
Take care.
Thanks for joining. See you all
Good
later.
night.
Bye.
Ciao.